Hello and welcome to this episode of Sabbath Worship with Ben. Hope you'll enjoy it, and as usual, we'll have a lesson and a presentation. Hope you all will have a blessed Sabbath. This week, now I'm going to do the lesson for this week. It is entitled Moving Mountains. After the Transfiguration, Jesus, as well as the 3 other disciples who went with him, came down the mountain, and when they met up with the other disciples, they found them surrounded by a large crowd with the religious leaders talking to them. So crowd was parted when they saw Jesus. So Jesus asked what was going on, and a man stood up and said that his son had been possessed by a demon which made him mute, and the demon would often throw him into the river, into the fire, would cause him to go stiff. He would have seizures. So he said that he had brought him to the disciples, hoping that they could heal him, but they couldn't. So Jesus said that the generation was perverse, and that they would never believe unless they saw miracles. And he asked them to bring the boy to him. So when the demon in the boy saw Jesus, he had a fit and lay writhing on the ground. So Jesus asked how long it had been going on. So the man said, since he was a little child. So Jesus commanded that the demon come out of the boy. So he writhed, and then the boy continued to writhe until the demon left. Then he was so still that people thought that he was dead, but Jesus took him by the hand and he rose up. So later on, privately, the disciples asked Jesus why they couldn't cast out the demon. Jesus said if they had faith like a mustard seed, then that they would be able to do anything, even to make mountains move. He told them that this kind only came out by prayer and fasting. So if we look at each piece of the story, we can get a few lessons from it. First is we can start by looking at the ending. Jesus told his disciples that if they had faith, so faith isn't simply the belief in Jesus, it's something more than that. So it's what we have to develop as Christians in our lives. We have to develop trust, and we have to develop a strong connection with God. And through that, through our relationship with Jesus, through His Spirit, that's how we can accomplish anything. So when He said that this kind only came out through prayer and fasting, it's a reminder to us that in everything sometimes we'll have to work, in a sense, to get things. When we ask God for something, it's not just a one and done. If we know that it's something that God approves of, as it's in accordance with God's will, then the best thing to do is to simply keep asking God. So, like the woman that we talked about last week, sometimes to test our faith, God will not respond to us in the way we want, or even at all at first. And some will be discouraged and turned away, but others, like the woman, will stay fast, and because they understand what God is like and what He wants for His children, they'll continue to ask until they receive. So that's what we should do as well. Whenever we're praying to God for something, we should continue to ask till God shows us His will. So looking backwards at the Father who brought His Son to be healed, Jesus, the part that I left out was that Jesus said that anything was possible if he believed, because the man said that if you can do anything, please help my son. So Jesus said, anything is possible if you believe. The man cried out immediately, I believe, help my unbelief. It's a very powerful message. And Jesus, as we can see, complied. So when when we believe in Jesus, there'll be some part of us that is not fully acceptant. This man recognized that he had problems with believing. So he asked Jesus to help him with his faith and with his belief, and Jesus was more than willing to help him. So whenever we face problems with and trusting and believing in Jesus, all we have to do is take the first step and ask him for help us with our unbelief. So finally, going back to the beginning of the story, the disciples were being surrounded by the people, and the religious leaders were questioning them. So they had, of course, tried to cast out the demon, and they had failed. So it didn't look very good on their part, and that's why they asked Jesus why they couldn't cast it out. Because Jesus had given them the power previously to cast out demons when he sent them out among the cities. So Jesus was telling them Jesus, of course, told them that they needed faith, but it's a reminder for us that sometimes when we ask, we won't receive. And so either there's only two options. It's either there's three options. God has a better plan for us later down the road. God is trying to test our faith, or it's something that we're lacking. So, of course, in this example, the disciples weren't lacking faith, because that's what Jesus talked about in front of the crowd and to them privately. They needed faith. So if we're ever find ourselves in a situation where trying to work, in a situation might be because we need faith, but it could be that we're lacking something else in our Christian experience. So the right course of action to take is to talk to God and to see what we're missing. And it might be faith, but it might be something else as well. So it's important to examine our lives and to pray to God to help us with whatever we need to grow so that we can do His work better. So that's the lesson for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. Now I'm going to do my presentation. This presentation is going to be based off of Mark 12, 1-9. To shortly summarize this passage of scripture, it's about Jesus telling a parable to some people when the religious leaders were around. So he said, a man built a vineyard with grapes, but then he had to leave to do business for an extended period of time in another country. So he hired some men to take care of the vineyard. So the vineyard was already planted, they just needed someone to tend it. So he hired a group of people and he paid them to tend the vineyard. So the harvest was ready, and since he had paid them, the agreement was that the owner got to collect the funds and the resources from the vineyard. So the man, of course, sent a messenger to go and collect the resources, but the people in the vineyard had grown used to maintaining it. Had been a long time, so they refused to give him any money, and they beat up the person who he sent and sent him on his way. So the man sent another servant, and this one they tried to stone and gave him nothing and sent him away. So he sent a third servant, and this one they killed. So he sent more and more servants until finally he had an idea. So he said, if I send my son, because the son back then and even today is respected as the father's heir, so was sent as an ambassador for the father. So he represented the father in a way. So he thought to himself, if I send them my son, they'll respect my son. So he sent his son to ask for his father's share of the money. So they saw the son coming. So they schemed among themselves and said, this is the heir to all that the man has. So if we kill him, then we'll get the vineyard for ourselves. So they let him approach, and then they killed him. So Jesus then asked what the man would do next. And so of course, the man would come and he would send people to kill. He would get the evil hands who were working in his vineyard killed for all that they had done. So the religious leaders were very upset. This parable, they wanted to arrest Jesus, but they couldn't because all the people were there, so they left. So to quickly break down why the religious leaders were upset is a simple parable. So the man who was in charge of the man who owned the vineyard was God. And so the people of Israel, especially the religious leaders, were represented by the hands. And so God sent messengers, which were like the prophets and the priests, who tried to talk to the people, but they refused, and some they abused, and others they killed, till God finally sent his son, which of course was Jesus. So Jesus was predicting that, rightfully and correctly so, that they would kill him, and they would ignore what he had said, just like they had ignored what the prophets had said. Of course, this is what they were planning to do and what they eventually did. So by asking what the man would do, Jesus was showing that eventually God would say enough is enough, and he would remove the specialness that he was for Israel. So he said that God would eventually come and repay them for what they had done. So it's not just the religious leaders, it's everyone today who has been warned has all the examples in the Bible, and now more messengers are coming in the form of Christians who try to witness to people, but those who refuse to and reject it will eventually face judgment. So God might not punish them now, but in the final judgment they will be tried, and because they refused, even though God gave them so many chances, just like the man in the story, he sent them more and more servants, and even trusted them to take care of his son, and he didn't stop just when the first one was killed. He gave them so many chances, and eventually they crossed the line. So that's what happened to the Jewish nation. So that's what eventually happened to those who who refuse to accept what Jesus said, and not just refuse, but end up persecuting the messengers of God. So it's what we want to avoid. So let's make sure that we listen to what God is telling us so that we don't end up like that. So that's the presentation for this week. Hope you all enjoyed it. Hope you all will have a blessed Sabbath. Till next week, bye.